Time's gone 4 minutes after the hour, 6 o'clock, and it's a very good evening to you, and welcome to once again another broadcast brought to you by GCIS, that's Government Communications and Information System, on behalf of the Department of Justice. And they're not by themselves this evening. They've got a whole variety of stakeholders that have made this broadcast possible. It's a big thank you to SAPS for having joined them at the National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, Department of Social Development also on board as well, not forgetting the Department of Health, the Department of Basic Education, Correctional Services, the Legal Aid South Africa. They've also came on board, and it's a big thank you to them for having made this one possible. My name is Karabo Lance, and I'm glad to be spending this time with you. Hey, listen, we're going to be adding another hour to this broadcast, so normally we have it for about an hour, but this time around, because we've got two beautiful ladies in the studio, we're going to stretch it all the way up until 8 o'clock, so I'm looking quite forward to that one there. Well, this evening, it's an evening that all parents, children should be listening to, and we're going to be exploring and learning a little bit more about the Child Justice Act. So that's Act number 75 of 2008, and lots of questions really arise as far as the Child Justice Act is concerned. We're talking about questions like issues around the age of the child, and the aim and the role of the Child Justice Act, and so forth, and we're going to be exploring all of that. Many of those questions will be attended to in this broadcast, so don't worry about it. Parents, guardians, teachers, law practitioners, etc., be part of this one here. If you don't, you're going to be missing out on quite a lot of information that we have for you. And unlike many of the programs that we have and the programs that you have already been part of, now this one is going to be slightly different. It's going to be more of a discussion, if anything else. But it's not preventing you as a listener to be calling in. Should you have any questions with regards to what we're talking about this evening, you're more than welcome to call us on our toll-free number. If you're calling from a telecom line, the number is as follows. It's 0800 142 446. The number, as I said, toll free from a landline, 0800 142 446. I've mentioned two beautiful ladies, and here they are. The first one is Miss Osman Pritima, as well as Miss M. Ngati. And joining us by way of telephone, unfortunately, Miss Vuyokazi Ketele Mhlanga could not be joining us due to certain circumstances beyond her control. And these three ladies are going to be chatting to us. It's a very good evening to you. Let's start with you, Vuyokazi. Thank you so much for having taken some time to be with us.
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners and my colleagues there at the studio.
There we go, and a very good evening to you, Ms. Pratima and Ms. Mnandi.
Good evening, Karabo, and good evening to all the listeners as well. Good evening.
Before we really go on with our program, let's perhaps just find out exactly what you guys do, the roles that you're playing in your various departments. Let's start with you, Vuyokazi. Maybe you'd like to explain to us the role that you play and what department you're in.
Okay, the role that we have played as NPA in terms of the Act, we are required to develop directives. Those directives are rules and regulations that prosecutors must follow when they are dealing with children in conflict with the law, and also to come up with training manuals so that we can train prosecutors so that they can be able to deal with children effectively and efficiently. And moreover than that, we have a responsibility of reporting to Parliament on how many numbers do we have for children that have been diverted since this Act came into operation.
Thank you so much, Vuyokazi. Now, what position do you hold at the NPA?
I'm a senior state advocate at the Social Offences and Community Affairs Unit.
There we go. And then let's go on to Ms. Osman Pritima, the position that you hold, and what department are you from?
Okay, Karabo, I work with the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, and I'm the manager for the implementation of the Child Justice Act, the Children's Courts, as well as the Departmental Drug Master Plan.
Ms. Mnandi with a big smile. She can actually see that I'm going to her, so she's getting ready for me, you see. And the position that you're holding?
Thanks, Karabo. I'm the section head for children and vulnerable groups within the visible policing area. And basically what we do is develop national instructions, training, and referral networks, particularly with the probation officers, child and youth care centers, and just generally handle children. We're usually the first point
There we go. So that should really now convince you that we are geared up for your questions. So whatever question that you might be having this evening, we'll be more than ready to be taking your calls at 0800 142 446. We're talking about the Child Justice Act. And a couple of times you'll hear me saying CGA. That's what I mean. The Child Justice Act, the 75 of 2008. So let's get on with it. I'm pretty excited to be doing this broadcast here. We've never done something of this magnitude before, at least that which I'm involved in. So let's go for it and find out a little bit more about the Child Justice Act number 75 of 2008. Ms. Pratema, tell us about it. What are we looking at here for those people who are not really clued up with regards to the Act?
All right, thanks, Karabo. The Child Justice Act was signed into law on the 7th of May, despite the fact that it was developed during 2008 and even earlier. And it was published then on the 11th of May, and it came into effect on the 1st of April 2010. And the Act seeks to establish a criminal justice system for children under the age of 18, and for those whom we regard as being in conflict with the law. And the Act is also established using the values underpinning the Constitution, and specifically in terms of children, Section 28. And then also is very mindful of our international obligations in terms of children, and especially children in conflict with the law. The Act has very many features which provide specifically for children under the age of 18. In our country, children over the age of 18 are regarded as adults. So children below the age of 18 are catered for in terms of this legislation. So the Act provides for the minimum age of criminal capacity and for children who lack criminal capacity. It deals with very many features such as securing the child's attendance at courts, provides for the assessment of children, provides for other features such as diversions and preliminary inquiries, and also for specific child courts, and then has very specific provisions in terms of the way children are dealt with. I think it's very important that in our history we recognize that children often weren't catered for in very many pieces of legislation, specifically, for instance, around the Criminal Procedure Act. And given our international obligations, we realized, of course, and also in terms of the Constitution, that children need to be dealt with as children, whether they have committed an offense or not. So there's a recognition that children were not treated as children, that our facilities weren't built to deal with children as children. And then this Act comes along and emphasizes the best interests of children and singles out children, even when they're in conflict with the law, for the special protection, so that they have special safeguards which are put in place in terms of this Act. Not to be detained except as a measure of last resort, and that comes out of our conventions on the right of the child. And if then they are detained, that children are detained for the shortest possible period of time, and it's the appropriate period of time.
Yeah.
And then also to be treated in a manner that's appropriate to the age and the understanding of the child. So the measures that are taken must be taken in such a manner that they are kept in conditions which take account of the child's age, the child's sex, to be kept separately from adults, separately between girls and boys, and then also to take account of the developmental needs. So most of these are in line with our international obligations to which we are signatories in terms of all the very many conventions that we have. So it seeks to divert children as well, rather than incarcerating them in prisons. So with the result that we have a system which recognizes that when children are in conflict with the law, there has to be another process that could be utilized where the child acknowledges his or her responsibility in terms of the offense that's been committed. And we'll talk a bit about the process that actually undertakes.
We'll definitely get into that. 14 after 6, time flies when we're dealing with issues of most importance. But now there's something that I'm picking up here, and now one may ask, isn't this act maybe sort of like a scapegoat for kids to go on and misbehave and commit crime and all of that? But Ms. Mliti, we're going to come to you just now. But let me take Sipho Chauke calling all the way from Palaborwa, and we thank you so much, Sipho, for having taken some time to be part of this broadcast. You win the award this evening of being our first caller, Sipho. Good evening to you.
Good evening to you too, Mr. Garov.
What is your question, sir?
My question, I'm not sure if I'm going to put it in the right way, but I hope and believe your guests will understand exactly what I want to know from this question.
Go for it. Let's see.
Okay. The issue is that according to what I know, or the way it is, crime is a crime. There is no minor crime.
Mm-hmm.
Why should it be in the case where someone do a crime, like killing somebody, but under a certain age? Because I believe for a crime, is the very same crime.
Mm.
After implementing this law, Child
Justice Act here.
Yes. Then is there any changes in the law now in order to show those cases did the Raukivana or those crimes did the Raukivana and now only decrease the now or there's no change or it's increasing just like that? That's what I want to know.
Ke go leboga gore wena o tsere mogala ga go re letša ga le gore mhlomo go go bolela rena ka sepedi o ka dira jwalo nomoro ya rena mogala ke 0800-142-446 o ka bolela rena ka Setswana 0800-142-446. It's a toll-free number if you're calling from a landline. Ungakhuluma nathi ngesizulu mawufuna ukukhuluma isizulu ngiyasizwa ngiyasikhuluma naso isizulu 0800-142-446. Thetha nathi ngesixhosa. I'm going to make my program manager very impressed here. He's got a big smile on his face because I've spoken the language that he understands the most. So do that. Don't miss out on our broadcast this evening. Those are the questions coming from Sipho, and maybe let's jump to a guest on the line and just find out maybe what your take is on this regard. Vuyokazi? Okay, we're going to be chatting to Vuyokazi just now, but maybe Ms. Mliti, you want to jump in onto this one and maybe just explain to us with regards to the questions that Sipho had.
Actually, it also deals with the issue of whether this is a soft option that is being employed on children. And it is an issue really that we need to correct that perception that no, when it comes to children, a soft option is taken. No, it's considered just as serious. But what it does is in the assessment that is conducted by the social workers, or rather the probation officers, they're able to determine in terms of the child's understanding. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about a 10-year-old, for instance, their circumstances, their understanding, are they aware of the extent of seriousness of what they have done in actually contributing to the murder of somebody? Mm-hmm. And then take them through the best rehabilitative and developmental process for that child. Mm-hmm. So that the idea being to change the behavior of the child such that they will never again, and they fully understand the wrongness of what they have actually done. So it isn't a soft option because it's an assessment that says, of all these options, is it appropriate for this child who's seen it all, done it all, to actually be taken through a diversion process? Or, given their age and their understanding, as Pritima had indicated earlier, then maybe this child, it would be more appropriate to take them through a court process. Let me just give an example. There was a certain rape case involving, children. Yeah. Having assessed the children and having found that it's actually children who raped each other. Having found that their understanding and appreciation of what had gone through in the preliminary inquiry was such that they understood that what they did was wrong. Then it started opening and paving the way that there may be hope for these children to be rehabilitated through a diversion process. But they were also warned that should they not go through what they need to do in terms of the diversion, then they would immediately go back into the court process and be taken through the full, system of the law. And the same with murder cases, that also happens. You may find that this child, it's more appropriate to take them through the court process and have it operate from that level.
Some of the big words that you mentioned in them, and those are diversion programs, and you mentioning something about processes that are going to be undertaken, assessment reports. We're going to be getting into that just for our listeners to understand exactly what we're talking about. Patko, hold on. I'm coming to you now. You want to add something?
Yes, I'd like to add something to what my colleague has actually said here. I think the caller has raised some very important issues. He's correct when we say we look at a crime and it's a crime. However, there are different levels of seriousness of a crime. So not every crime offense is a rape case or a murder case. There are other things such as theft out of a car, housebreaking, various forms of crime or offenses. And in the Child Justice Act, there are 3 schedules which look at the different levels of crime, and they number from Schedule 1 through to Schedule 3. And depending on the seriousness, those matters are dealt with in a different way. So, for instance, if it's a Schedule 1, which is the least serious matter, then there's a possibility that after assessment, that child will be referred to Vuyokasi's organization, the NPA, with a view to checking whether this is a first-time offense, whether this child is a child that needs to go for diversion, and then the prosecutors can actually recommend a diversion. But as it gets more serious, the child justice kicks in with all its force. It is quite a powerful one. And then just also in regard to that, I think we must bear in mind that this act also sets in place the fact that children below the age of 10 are deemed not to have criminal capacity. So if you are a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, you're deemed not to have criminal capacity, meaning that you don't understand right and wrong, and you're regarded as a very minor child below the age of 10. Then it is the duty of the child to be referred to the Department of Social Development, so that the Social Development and the Children's Courts will deal with that matter. So I think that's a very important fact. There's one other issue that I think we do, and it stems directly from Mr. Chauke's call that I wanted to mention, and that is the issue of what we call QBAC, which is children used by adults to commit crime. And what we have found is, due to the misunderstanding that this is a soft option for children, adults are now utilizing children to crime. But what happens in an instance like that is that the adult is also prosecuted, and severely. And the child will also be dealt with in terms of the Child Justice Act, but the adult will be dealt with in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act.
22 after 6 o'clock. Let's get to you, Patko. You're calling all the way from Eliwell North. Thank you so much for having taken some time to chat to us. What is your question?
Yaphila ngiyabulisa bomama abayithu abalapha esibili buthi benifuna ukuqonda mina ndiyavuma bathetha nge-justice system ndifuna ukuqonda kukho abantwana kufana ukuthi lo mntana lona ne u-under age, let's say una 15 years, and then the meantime kufana ukuthi une-15 years ufana ukuthi wenza an accident yokuthi well uhlaba omnye, and then kufana ukuthi ngokuvulwa i-case kuzothiwa ke ngoku lo mntana lo under age akakwazi ukuthi ke ngoku abe ke ngoku yabantu. Ingaba ke ngoku la crime ayenzileyo ayizubhalwa phansi ukwenzela ukuthi the meantime erithe phaa mhlawumbi kwiminyaka 18 iphinde ivuke, ngoba kumaxesha amaninzi ngoyibona isenzeka loo kuthiwa okay ucommitted this crime une-16 years but ngoku iyavuka. Ingaba ke ngoku ibangelwa yintoni leyo? Then umbuzo wami wesibini, ndifuna ukuqonda kwakhona koomama, since ufumana ukuthi well kwixesha elininzi i-justice ibanika i-freedom abantwana abo, ufumana ukuthi no baviolata ii-rights zabantu abadala okanye abazali babo. Then ke into endifuna iqonde yokuba kunabantwana abo ufumana ukuthi ngamanye ixesha amaninzi, like let's say this girl ebe-pregnant and then ufumana ukuthi ngoku udampa umntana. Ingaba ke ngoku i-justice system ngeyiphi i-role abathi bayidlale bona kwicala labo ukuqinisekisa ukuthi ezo nto ezinjalo azenzeki? Ndiyabulela kakhulu Karabo ngizamamela kuTakalani Community Radio.
Ndabulela mfowethu man. Khangelani, you calling from Kala. What is your question, Khangelani?
Okay, but mina into ndifuna uyiqonda mhlekazi wami, ndifuna uqonda uba i-Child Justice Act le ka-2008 yahluka njani na kwi-Children's Charter that was proposed the United Nations. Then umama ebekhe wamenshina i-issue ye-specific child courts. Ngoku ndizama ubuza uba xa kuthithwa ngezi court kuthiwa zezabucala zenzele abantwana, ezona into enothi zidila nazo specifically zidila neziphi izinto, because ixesha elinje siva into njengoma-Child Abuse Act, oma-Child Support Act, nento ezinjengoma-Child Care Act. Ingaba zonke ezi zinto zipolish under this same act?
Ndiyabulela mfethu.
Okay, thank you, boss.
24 after 6 o'clock, 0800 142 446. That's the number to call should you want to be a part of this broadcast of this evening. Perhaps with a suggestion, perhaps with a question. You're more than welcome to do that. I haven't forgotten about you, Vuyokazi. Maybe let's bring you in on this one, and maybe let's jump back to the question that was asked by Padco. Criminal records come back to haunt you. But here's a big question now. Somebody's saying that if a child has committed a crime, maybe they were underage at the time of the offense. Now, is that crime going to be recorded? And what will happen when they grow up? Will that criminal record be taken out and be shown to the person that they look, when you were 10 years old, this is what you've done. So therefore you've got a criminal record. How is it dealt with? Vuyokazi? Okay, I think Vuyokazi, we've lost her there for a bit. We'll try to get a hold of her as soon as we can. Though, you would like to jump in on that one, Ms. Mngadi?
Yes, and Mbali, please, Karabo.
Oh,
everybody's yeah.
Every time you like, ish, you know,
wonko pretty and so on.
So, feel like a 16 fellow now. Okay.
No, I just want to feel good to work at home.
I think it's a very important one that Ulongujana Upatko is bringing up here, because I think even parents are really they're really concerned about this one here. If my child does something as a minor, will that come back to haunt them?
Could I answer the issue of the criminal records issue? Could I leave it to Upritima?
Okay.
And could I just answer the aspect he was talking about? AOT agabanjwa when umntana ena 15 okanye omunye uzosuke adampe ingane and adedelwe, ngoba I think let us correct those perceptions.
Yeah.
Ingane, if you stab somebody, whether under 18 and above 10, then you can be charged for whatever crime that could be. Now, you've stabbed somebody at the age of 15.
Yeah.
Definitely you can be charged.
Okay.
But I think the thing that confuses people is this one. Eyoguti, you are detained as a last resort. Now, you are released into the care of your parent, unless there are compelling reasons why. When you have to be then kept within a police facility, just as an example.
Yeah.
And Nakona, we can't keep you for longer than 24 hours. That is our mteto wetu. It's 24 hours. Standing orders, zagaponis, but then it is 48 hours in terms of the Constitution. But then you get charged, and then we have to notify probation officer, then does the assessment, and then you go to a preliminary inquiry. Go back. Same story about dumping gun. You can be charged as well. You are charged for that, and then you are dealt with immediately, so that we can deal with your situation so that you don't do it again. Regarding the criminal records expungement and so on, I think Pritima can handle that one.
Look, the process in terms...
Pritima, maybe before you jump in,
yes.
I don't want to keep Tato holding for a bit longer. Let me take Tato's question, and we'll jump back to your explanation there. Tato, good evening to you, calling all the way from Rhodoport.
Good evening.
What is your question, Tato?
Good evening, Karabo. I just want to ask, in terms of, these young children, especially the ones that are, I'm just thinking of a child who's 10 years old, who's committed a serious crime. How are these children's psychological well-being taken care of? I can only imagine the trauma that they go through. What is the department doing just to make sure that they are, the trauma is not, does not damage them for the rest of their lives, because I can only imagine how traumatic it is.
Tato, is this now the trauma that you're talking about? Is it the trauma of being detained? If I can, I'm not sure if I'm using the right word.
Yes, I'm just talking about the process that your guest just spoke about now in the studio, going through all.
All right, I think we got that. I think it's the trauma of being detained, not necessarily the crime itself, if I'm not mistaken. All right, we'll go back to that one, Tato. Thank you so much. I think your battery is gone. Thank you so much that you've given us a call, and thank you so much, Vuyo guys. You're back on the line. I see that we're definitely going to be engaging with you soon. So hang in there. There are a couple of questions that I would like you to ask to answer. Really, you were explaining for Pratima with regards to that follow-up question.
Yes, I think what's important to know is to understand the process in terms of the Child Justice Act. For instance, if a child is apprehended for having committed an offence, one of the first things that happens is that the police will need to establish what the child's age is. Because the moment the child is found to be below the age of 10, a different process kicks in. And we'll talk about that in terms of Tato's question from Roodepoort. But if the child is found to be above the age of 10, then it's up to the police to charge that child with an offence and call on the probation officers to do an assessment of the child. Now, that's a critical part of the process of the Child Justice Act, because that process done by the probation officers under the Department of Social Development then will give us the information in terms of the child itself. In other words, how old he is or she is, what the home circumstances might be, whether he's been schooling or she's been schooling, whether the child's living on the streets or something like that. So that's all part of the background information, and it's done in a very detailed way, because that information is critical for the next phases of the Child Justice Act. So if the child was charged with an offence at the age of, say, 15, and in terms of the probation officer's assessment was found to be the first offence, for instance, and then the probation officer and SAPS will then see to it that the next step is that the child gets taken to the courts. There, the prosecutor will be the first link with the child in terms of the offence. So there, the prosecutor will then examine this charge sheet as well as the assessment report in order to determine whether this is a child who's a repeat offender, whether there are other crimes that the child has been convicted of or whatever, and then refer the child, if it's not a serious crime. The stabbing is a serious one. If it's not a serious one, like it's a theft of a loaf of bread, for instance, then the prosecutor has the opportunity to divert that child instead of going through the entire process of the preliminary inquiry and a trial. Then that child will be given a program that the child needs to follow. And if the child complies, there will be a report back in respect of that diversion, which then means that the child's process, child justice process, is complete. That record is fed back to the criminal record section. And that means that the case is closed, there's no criminal record. So in a case of that 15-year-old who was sent on a diversion program, has completed that program successfully, then you'll find that the child will not have a criminal record. I would suggest that my colleague Vuyo also comes in and talks a bit about where the child is not successful and what the next processes would be.
Vuyo, maybe let's jump into that one there. So if the child is not successful with regards to the program being given to them to, if I may say, rehabilitate, hopefully I'm using the right word here, what happens there going forth?
When the child did not comply with the diversion order and the diversion program, what happens? The child is brought back to the normal criminal justice system. It means that the child will go through trial processes where a child will be asked the question, where we are trying to prove that indeed the child has committed this offense. After the trial process has finished, we can even consider diversion at that point in time again, when we see that the child is acknowledging responsibility, when the child is meeting the requirements of diversion. We can still divert a child before a prosecutor closes its case we can divert there. But if we are not satisfied about the requirements of diversion, we proceed. The child is convicted and sentenced. But what is nice about this piece of legislation is that even at sentencing stage, we can consider diversion program as an option of a sentence, like community-based sentence, when a magistrate is saying that, okay, you are convicted with this particular offense and therefore we are sentencing you to a community-based sentence, that particular magistrate can even utilize a diversion program for this particular child. What we are trying to do is to make sure that the child does not get into these criminal justice processes. But then if the child is not complying, they go back to the trial process. Then we deal them there at the trial process. The normal trial processes, they proceed there.
All right. There's a statement, children should not be seen but heard. Am I correct?
I think that's the correct
Well, I
statement.
wonder if that's correct. Well, we're going to be hearing from them coming up later. So make sure that you don't move an inch from your radio. We're going to be hearing about some of the children and what they have to say and some of the difficulties and challenges that they're experiencing. Niva, if I'm not mistaken, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You're calling all the way from Uppington. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Karavan. Good evening to the guests at the studio. It's Meza from Radio Riverside in Uppington.
Good evening.
And I just love your enthusiastic approach to to where you're calling from and the radio station that you're listening. And thank you so much to that radio station that you're listening to for having taken this broadcast this evening. What is your question, Neva?
Thank you, Karabo. My question is, there are children that have been used to commit crime in the community. How does the Justice Department handle their cases, especially those who are staying in the streets?
All right, you've mentioned something there. Those who are living on the streets. There's a key word there. So look out for that. It's coming up later. We're going to be discussing some of the issues with children living on the streets. Would you like to answer that one then, Bali?
Yebo. Never. Whilst I'm answering your question, could I also link it to what Kangelani was indicating earlier on? Because now, really, you are talking about children in need of care and protection. And we have a way and instructions on how to handle such children. If I could just refer back to what Pritima has already indicated. The adult who is using a child to commit a crime, let us say, for instance, because the child is small, they can fit into small spaces and assist in a burglary. This adult will be charged with a burglary, forcing, breaking and entering. And in addition, he will have or she will have to answer a charge on using a child to commit a crime.
Even though they were not hands-on, even though they did not exactly go there themselves.
Yes.
Even if, because they planned it all, they planned the execution and so on and so forth, and may have threatened the child, adults. So that becomes the double
charge almost.
Charge that you automatically do. So really it's not to be recommended for adults to try and utilize children. Now, children staying on streets tend to be children that we are encouraging our members to always see them as children in need of care and protection. And the idea is that these children are to be taken and handed over to social workers, social services. We have a list of available social workers. We try also encourage that people have service level agreements so that if I come across a child outside McDonald's at 12 in the evening on a Friday night, I at least would know who to contact and who to hand that child over to. Of course, we'd have to have some order of alternative care that we would need to process. But in an emergency situation, as in the child, no fixed address.
Oh, beg your pardon about that. It's a caller. Stand by, Babu Msweli says, "Aguwe bab, ungabo suga lapho khona." We're just dealing with this matter, and once we're done, we're coming to a babam. So hang in there.
Okay, bab.
Aye, mbonge bab. Which means then what our members are also sensitized to this issue, not only through the national instruction, But also, there's the vulnerable children training that we have, just to take the child, hand over, so that the child can then be properly handled by the social workers, which also links to the issue Tato was referring to, trauma. How do you deal with the trauma that the child experiences? Again, social workers would be trained to deal with that psychological counseling issues, dealing with the child, and getting them calmed and back into a situation where they can be productive members of the community.
0800 142 446. That's the number to dial to. You want to be chatting to us. We got the three ladies here, and the two of them are in the studio. One is joining us by way of telephone. Thank you so much, Pratima, for having taken some time. Thank you so much, Mbali, and not forgetting you, Vuyokazi, by way of telephone. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Babu Msweli, let's take your question, and after that, we're going to be going to Balekile. Balekile, holding on all the way from the Free State. Hang in there. We're coming to you now. Babu Msweli. Bunjan, Bab. I said, but we're not going to talk about that now.
I say,
Also,
akubingelele Karabo bese ngibingelele ikhambeli zethu ezikhona ngibingelela abalali bomsakazo ikhona FM ikakhulukazi nawo bonke nje abalali bama-community radio abambe iqhaza lolu hlelo olubaluleke kangaka baba khona lapha engithanda ukusala khona kancane ngiyeza ihambeli zethu uma zichaza khona lapha engifisa ukucacisela khona kancane ukuthi-ke ama-stakeholders njengoba ihambeli lezi zikhona iminyango lethintekile ekakhulukazi esebenza ngayo zemthetho nama-social worker njalo ukuthi-ke iluphi uhlelo abanalo lokudila ne-victim ukuthi-ke nayo ikwazi ukuthi is-understand lesimo noma ikwazi ukuthi samukele lesimo ikakhulukazi singaphansi kwalo mthetho lo we-Child Justice Act. So ngifuna nje ukuthola ngaphansi kwalo ukuthi-ke i-victim yona-ke itholaka noma badila kanjani nayo lesimo lesi.
Ngiyabonga baba. Balekile, all the way from the Free State. Balekile, what is your question? Good evening to you.
Good evening, sir. My question is, are there any child justice center in the state? And my second question is, you guys teach people about this Child Act? Is it like having some campaigns?
Okay, Balekile, I'm battling to hear you.
Sorry?
Can you speak a little bit louder for me? I'm just battling to hear you in the studio. Can you speak a little bit louder for me, babe?
Okay, my first question is, are there any child justice center in the state?
Where about?
Sorry?
In the Free State.
Okay, in the Free State. In the Free State. All right.
Yes, my second question is, are you guys these people about this Child Act? Is it like having some campaigns?
All right, 100%. I think I get you clearly there. Thank you so much, Balekile, for your call. Very important questions that you're asking there. 18 before 7 o'clock, 0800 142 446. Babu Msweli wants to find out now, are there any special programs? We're dealing with the offenders here. And for the past 40 or odd minutes, we've been talking about the offenders, whether they be minors or not. But that's what we've been concentrating on. Very important question. How does the victims... Are there any programs that are there to help them that are according with the Child Justice Act?
May I try that? That's a very good question. I want to thank Baba for that question. The first thing that I want to emphasize in regard to the Child Justice Act is that it's a very inter-sectoral act. That means that we have about 9 different departments that work together to bring services both to victims and to perpetrators. So in regard to the Child Justice Act itself, it was realized that we could not deal with the issue of children and criminality by ourselves as justice. This had to be done including all departments and all different organizations, even NGOs in this, who provide very, 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 very critical services so that we can provide these services to both the children and the victims. So in terms of the victims, we must recall that the children and any other victim is protected in terms of the Victims' Charter. Part of the process also requires that, for instance, the victim a statement will be done by the victim in regard to the harm that's been suffered, whether how they were harmed, whether windows were broken, whether they got hurt or whatever. That is prepared by the probation officer, and then it is tendered to the court in order to assist in regard to the sentencing of the child. So that's the kind of opportunity that's offered to the victim in order to be able to say something in regard to the harm that they suffered. But then the other processes that the Child Justice Act stipulates are more of the restorative justice options, for instance. So where, for instance, we would sit as the victims as well as the perpetrators and sit together and try and find out what the harm is, that was caused, with how the perpetrator now feels about the fact that there was an offence, and what sort of agreement they're going to come to. Also, in terms of community options that may be offered, you'll also find that the victim will be able to say, I want you, if for instance, let's say I broke a shop window and I'm the 15-year-old child, I can then say, I'm very sorry, I won't do it again, I don't know what to do, I don't earn money. So the shopkeeper would say, I want you to come and clean my shop for 4 months. And that could also be considered as part of the victim's option to restore the situation. So there are different ways of approaching it. And so there are options even available to victims, yes.
All right. 0800 142 446. That's the number to dial there. Children's Charter. That was another question that was asked by Ulongjan Ukangela. Kangela wanted to know the differences between, and we're going to come back to, I see you want to explain something more.
Yes.
But I've just picked up here that Kangelani will probably be upset with me because there was one question of his that we did not answer here. And is that whole, the relations between the Children's Charter that was brought in by the United Nations, that with regards to the Child Justice Act. What are there any differences? Are there any similarities?
Okay. The conventions and the treaties which are produced by the United Nations, and South Africa's become signatories to many of those. They need, in terms of becoming signatories for us now as a country, as a state country, is to first of all start incorporating whatever it is that we've taken the obligations of into domestic legislation, which means that we must develop acts in terms of South African law, setting out those obligations in terms of what we will do in terms of our law. So one of those, for instance, is the United Nations Children's Charter, or the rights of the child. And part of those are the issues around children's interests being held uppermost in every matter that concerns the child. Where children have committed offences, that they be dealt with in not more severely than adults, and that they are dealt with in such a way that their age and the circumstances are taken into consideration. And you'll find that when you read the Child Justice Act, you'll find many of those conditions are incorporated. And similarly with our Constitution, which forms the basis of the way we deal with people in South Africa, you'll find that we have incorporated whatever the United Nations conventions and the African charters might say. We've incorporated that into our law. And in terms of the minimum standards for prisoners, for instance, we've also incorporated what is needed from us in terms of the Child Justice Act and for the way children are dealt with.
Kangelani, you on the line?
Yeah, ndikumamele futhi.
Thatha mfundini.
Oh, okay, ngiyakuva futhi now ungiphendulile. Enye into ke ngobe ngifuna uyibuza futhi wami ingelo umcimbi bekhe wamention the issue of a specific child court. Benifuna ukhe nje unbrief nje just to highlight ba kanye ezicourt eziphi mhlambe ezona zinto zidila nazo that revolves around abantwana, to be specific at kwezi child court. This is what we deal with in A, B and C under these circumstances ezithile.
100%. Thank you so much there, Kangelani. We've got Vuyo, who's a dreamer, calling all the way from Begersdorp. It's a very good evening to you, Vuyo.
Hello, Karabo Gunjat.
Ndiyaphila mfethu kunjani?
Ndiphilile nam Karabo. Karabo ndi manibulise nako mama balapha studio ne. nezingomathaveni ngelo xesha abantwana baya bethonyiwe mhlawumbe ingaba ke ngokulonto i-Child Justice Act iyawakhusela na amalungelo wabantwana xa bathe bathuthumbiswa ngamapolisa mhlawumbi amapolisa afuna lo evidence kanye lo mntana atestify kule case kodwa ngokuye yakhe ne but abethe umntana ingaba ke ngoku act lena iwajonga na amalungelo abantwana. Umbuzo wesithathu ndifuna ubuza ke ngoku ukuba umntana usafunda andithi mos i-priority imfundo kulezwekazi loMzantsi Afrika, then the question is if umntana usafunda ke ngoku ingaba i-Child Justice Act like ijonga ngeliphi liso into yokuba umntana xa athe wasendenswa lo minyaka kanye ezo nyanga ukuba imfundo yakhe usilela kangakanani na, because as we all know ukuba ayikho imfundo phakathi etilongweni. Ndifuna nditshekisha nje futhi ngabezondo zijongolo phina ehlomza mamele unique.
Ndiyabulela mfowethu. Nonkululeko, you're calling all the way from Uppington. Don't worry there, Vuyo Ulongjan Usisimbali will definitely answer your questions. She's got them all noted down and she's read. She's read. Nkululeko, you're calling from Uppington.
Good evening, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And yourself?
I'm very well, thank you so much for calling in. What's your question?
A pleasure. I actually have two questions. The first one is I'd like to know what the aim of the Child Justice System of 2008 is, or the Child Justice Act.
All right, that's
what
your first.
The aim is.
Okay, is it your first one?
Yes,
the second one?
Yes, and the second one, I'd like to know what the relationship between the Justice Department, the NPA, the SAPS, Correctional Services, the Social Development, and the Legal Aid Board have with the Child Justice Act of 2008.
Thank you so much, Nkululeko. And as I said from the beginning of the broadcast, thank you so much to the following stakeholders in collaboration with the Department of Justice, South African Police Services. They came on board, National Prosecuting Authority. They're also part of this broadcast. The Department of Social Development, Department of Health, the Department of Basic Education, the Correctional Services guys also said, hey, we're not going to be left behind. We're going to be riding this one with you, and the Legal Aid of South Africa. These are the stakeholders. How are they relating? You're going to be finding out. So hang in there. We're going to definitely tell you, Nkululeko. And we're going to be finding out a little bit about some of the challenges that the street, I don't want to call them street kids, but let's call them children living on the streets. I think that's the appropriate term to use this evening. We're going to be finding out a little bit about some of the challenges they have. Let's go for it and check out what's happening around there.
Any of you, if you are arrested, why were you arrested? Were your rights read to you? Did you know your rights?
Salega tswara ma ka me ya ka me ka 24 bangara mo sturuweni mo la ke tsamaya ba fitla ba ema mo la ba researcha ba so searcha ba kreselo kan bona ba tshwere patsi mo la ba re nna ke latlhile patsi mo fatshe. Then banzi abangisa police station nele satarata yar sonta mantari ya koto ba fitla ba re 60 days in prison or 1,000 bay na ga ba botsa gara ke bereki a ke ne chelete re nga bila ga yona ba re se tsala ngwena re tshwere ka patsi ke re na batho ba le bankerele ke selo ente ba mpointa ka ntho ke sa ira mo bana ke at the end they felt like a full tracker go spantiti kana die 2 months ke sa ira se.
Is there someone who wants to say something about that?
Yeah, na bothata bo teng ka maphodisa go tshwariwa ba ntshwere ka June. So ka mko ba ntshwere mara June ba na le nna ba ntshwere ka patsi le re patsi ne sa tsubi ke nna ne tsuba ke tshomya ka se. So tshomya ka mkhorela a tshaba maphodisa thaela ba salan ba ntshwere ka patsi le sino ba ntshwere ka patsi la phodisa le tsang le lwa le nna ne le bushio he le lwa le nna ba le thapisa dikobo tsaka welo tapisa dikobo ka motlohela sharp o ya le nna police station ha ya le nna police station o fitla police station a sige mmontse le sefane ta mano o ngwa le sefane sa ga ke chabalala haybo so right ka mmota ke re nna sefane sa ga se chabalala sefane sa ga ke tsulo ta mano ha no cancela chabalala yena sharp ka usani wa khoto ku khoto kwa le ba re nna ngwa di sete di fane tsa maga ba mphancheta ta itena re sefane sa ga ke chabalala and then sefane sa ga sa nnete ke tsulo ba etsa ba mfa 2 months in prison ba nkisa ga popotjana. So in that 2 months ke ntse ke complain ka yona ntho ha ona maphodisa na itse re ntabe ya re sefane a se saka eng bona ba no mpotsa se salang o tshwere.
800-142-446. Those are some of the voices of the children that are living on the streets, some of the challenges that they are facing. One of them has mentioned that he was arrested while he was just walking about at night, and he was searched, even rights not read. He was searched, and he did not have anything on him, as the police would have thought maybe he had. But one of the things that he's mentioned is that dagga was planted in his pockets. And they've mentioned that they're arresting him for possession of an illegal substance. And another one came on and said he did not commit the crime of smoking dagga, but his friends were doing that, but he was arrested in 10. And in addition of that, when he went to the police station, the police insisted on writing a wrong surname on the statement. He insisted that the surname is incorrect, but they had proceeded to write an incorrect surname, thus resulting in the court fining him or charging him with, I would say, incorrect statement given, if I'm using the correct terms. So these are some of the challenges that really the kids are facing, the kids living on the streets are facing. What is our take on it? And I think, Vuyokazi, you've been holding on for a bit too long. Let's bring you in on this one here. Maybe you can understand, maybe you can bring us up to speed in terms of some of these challenges here. The rights of kids while being arrested. What rights do they have? What is it that they can insist on when the arrest is taking place as far as their rights are concerned?
The rights that they have are the rights that anyone that has committed crime has. For example, one of the rights is that a child has a right to legal representation. So a child can insist that before I can say anything, before I can move forward, I need my lawyer. And the state has a responsibility when the child cannot afford that particular lawyer. A state has a responsibility to appoint a lawyer on behalf of that particular child so that lawyer can assist that child. In the event where a child is saying, I don't need a lawyer, I'm going to proceed myself with this particular matter, the Child Justice Act always insists that there is no way that the child cannot be assisted by a legal representation. So if the child is saying that I don't need a person in terms of that right, a magistrate or a child justice court can appoint a legal representative from Legal Aid South Africa to assist the court, irrespective where the child is saying that I don't need any lawyer to assist me. So that is one of the rights that is incorporated in the Child Justice Act. So that child, even if the child is saying that I don't need a legal representative in this particular matter, I'm going to proceed myself. Child Justice Act insists that there must be a legal representative at that particular court. But one person will ask a question, but if a child is saying I don't need any person to assist me, why the court will appoint a person? A court will appoint that particular person to assist the court. You will understand that at court there are issues of cross-examination, issues of objections, and issues of sentencing. That child doesn't know anything about law. If the court is saying to that child, okay, address the court on sentencing, that child will not know anything. Therefore, the person who is a legal rep from Legal Aid South Africa, who is assisting the court, taking into consideration best interest of the child, will be able to assist the court with the sentencing option, even questions of clarity, because the child at court will not be able to ask questions of clarity, because will also agree with me that children are very scared of court settings, so they don't know what to ask and what not to ask. So that is one of the rights that is coming out clearly in the Child Justice Act, a legal right, a right to remain silent, a right to be offered information, what is going to be happening with this particular matter. And maybe to go to the one question that has been asked, what are we giving victims in terms of this particular act? You know, as prosecutors, our role mainly in terms of this act is to divert children away from the criminal justice system. But that act is saying to us, prosecutor, when you are about to divert a serious matter, for example, to do a rape case or a murder case, please consider the views of a victim. Like if this is a case of a rape, a victim will say to you, for example, will say that you are going to divert this person. I don't have a problem with that, but my problem is that I won't be able to stay with this particular person in the same community because I'm still traumatized with this issue. So those are things that we consider before we can divert children. And maybe also to come to the question that was asked about education, it is very important. When we're about to divert children, we consider those issues. If a child is still at school, we make sure that we divert that particular child to a program that will not disturb that child. Remember that in terms of the Act, to child to prison should be a last resort. You should have used the non-custodial sentences, like your community-based sentences, your restorative justice sentences, payment of fine or alternative to that. So we need to utilize that. We consider very much the issue of education. And one of the questions that I've heard from a listener is whether the probation officers do check what was the cause of this crime being committed by this child. That is the main aim of the assessment report, because before, as a prosecutor, I can divert this particular child, I need to get the circumstances of this child, why this child has committed this particular offense, because these offenses, they link to each other. It might happen that a child is committing an offense, is assaulting people outside because there's an assault going on, there's a domestic violence going home at home. So a probation officer's report will assist with regard to that. It might also happen that a child is stealing bread from ShopRite because there is no food at home. Therefore, there and there we can see that this child is in need of care and protection because this child is stealing because there is no bread at home. So that is the main purpose of the probation officer's report. And if we are not getting anything from a probation officer's report, in terms of the Act, we have something called a preliminary inquiry. That's where we seek more information. We want to get more clarity before we can even proceed with this particular child. We want to know that if the child is having a criminal capacity or not, because it might happen that a child is committing an offense without understanding the implications thereof, without understanding that a child actually committing an offense. So those are the things that we are looking at. Can I pause there?
So there we go. That's the voice of Vuyokazi Ketele Butlanga on the line, joining us there to be chatting to us this evening alongside Osis Osman and Osis Pratima rather, and Osis Mbali right here. So if you want to be chatting to them, 0800 142 446. Coming up in the next 3 minutes, we're going to be hearing a clip from the Legal Aid South Africa, what they have to say. So hang in there, that clip is coming up. But let's go to Sis Mbali. Some of the questions that were asked by Ubab Vuyo has been answered briefly by Usis Vuyokazi. Yes. And I think that's those names going in conjunction there. But there are some of the questions that are still outstanding that you would like to tackle there quickly.
Very quickly, I think Vuyokazi umphendule kahle uVuyo. Ukubethwa, the being beaten up. Now, just to say very briefly, you know, all issues relating to torture, beating up, that is definitely not part of the way that our members are supposed to conduct themselves with anybody, whether it's a child, adult, whatever. And I would just urge that people who say they experience such should always ensure that they make that report to the local managers, the station commander, the shift commander. They can actually say, who is in charge? Why do you want him? I want to lay a complaint. And then set the complaint so that it can be dealt with immediately.
3 minutes after 7 o'clock, 0800 142 446, the number to dial. Now we're going to be hearing a clip about one of the children living on the streets with regards to their experiences regarding the Legal Aid of South Africa.
What do you think Legal Aid Board should do for cases like this?
Legal Aid bona skervela ke loyara tsela tsa mmusho so ntse ba re thuse bona mara ntšho ka lebela o irala o khona soriwa maybe a kere ke be ka matho ga o dwa phiera la obedi go khoto ba botsa o nyaka loyara mmusho re loyara tšhelete o botsa ra ke nyaka loyara mahala ke bere ke sno ba fa loyara ga o dwa prayer la bo 3 go khoto still 1000 loyara mara ba botsi tso nyaka loyara wa re every time ba o remind mara wena nna ntho se lengwe e bolela mara o nyakile lawyer a mmuso o lebeletse re tla o thusa nna ke bone mmereko wa bona ba o ira pila-pila
ba ja tšhelete ya rona fela lawyer tsa mmuso just it man ba nyaka tšhelete kore tshwentse ba o thuse mo molatong ba botsise gore o tshwere kang o ba botse gore nne ke tshwere ka patšhe se mare ke tsela ba re nne 600 fine o ka kgona e ntshana wa e bona o sa ntshe o tshwere ga ona ntho e ba o thusang ka ona no help.
4 minutes after 7 o'clock, this is our special broadcast brought to you by GCIS, Government Communications and Information System, on behalf of the Department of Justice, and they, together with the SAPS, that's the South African Police Services, together with the NPA, National Prosecuting Authority, DSD, Department of Social Development, Department of Health, Department of Basic Education, Correctional Services, and as well as the Legal Aid South Africa, they've made this show possible, giving you information that is very vital to you, and would like to invite you to call in with questions that you might be having this evening. Mahlasela, we're going to be coming to you now in a short while, but before we do that, Pratima, you would like to mention something quickly?
Yes, I wanted to respond a little bit to the question that was posed by Balekile of the Free State. And she mentioned she wanted to know what was the aim of the Act, and then also mentioned all those departments that we work with and what was the reason for that. And that is basic and fundamental to the understanding of the Child Justice Act. So, as I said earlier, when the Child Justice Act was drafted, it was recognized that social problems and criminal issues amongst children have to be dealt with in an intersectoral manner. So you'll find that each of the departments that are involved are contributing to the issue of dealing with criminality amongst children. So that SAPS, for instance, has a specific role in terms of their core business. So they would arrest and charge somebody who's committed an offense. The Department of Social Development gets involved in order to see to it that children are assessed and get the benefit of the programs in terms of diversion. So that's their role. Then the NPA deals with the prosecutor, and so on. We go through. Department of Health will look at the trauma issues and see whether criminal capacity assessments need to be done. Department of Education would deal with the issue of having to continue the child's education. Department of Correctional Services, for instance, right at the beginning when we started with the implementation of the Act, I think we had in the region of above 700 children in prison, and most recently it's been reported as only having 77 children, because there's been a recognition by Department of Correctional Services that prison is not a place for children unless there is nothing else in terms of the sentencing options. The other question that Balekile mentioned was around whether there are any child justice facilities. Yeah. And in the Free State, we have what is known as the One-Stop Child Justice Center, which is located at Mangaung. And it's one of the oldest one-stop child justice centers. And the idea is to provide all the services that a child in conflict with the law would require. So you'll find that SAPS have an office there. The judiciary are also on the premises. Social development is on the premises. LASA is on the premises. So all the parties that are involved in providing services to a child when the child's in conflict with the law are available at the One-Stop Child Justice Centers. And maybe when we have a little bit of time, we could talk about the aims of the Act, because that was another question that Balekile had posed.
We're going to definitely jump into that. We still have a bit more time to go. We're going to be wrapping up at 8 o'clock. We've got about 15 minutes to go. But let me not keep you holding for long. Neville, you calling from Bloemfontein. Good evening to you. Good evening to you, Neville. Okay, looks like Neville, you on the line.
Yes.
Good evening to you. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you, man?
I'm well, thank you. Neville, what is your question?
Sorry?
What is your question, sir?
Okay, my question is, in case of young people that are detained at a central care center, and you find that maybe, they can't go with, fear things, right? You don't go out.
Neville, hold on for me. Are you walking around?
Yes.
Can I ask you to stay in one spot until you finish your question? As you walk about, we're losing signal. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, it didn't sound like a Neville there. Definitely didn't sound like a Neville there. is this who is this on the line now? Hold on. Neville?
I'm still on the line, Vuyokazi Ketelo.
Okay, Vuyokazi, I still want to tackle Ulongunjan. The question Yaga put Neville Lana from Bloemfontein. I think we had, you see, that's exactly what I was talking about. He was moving about and now we've lost signal. But no worries, our producers are definitely going to get a hold of you as soon as they can. Hey, listen, don't miss out on this evening's broadcast. 0800 142 446. That's the number to dial. 0800 142 446. Oka buela naga Setswana ga ile gore batla go bua Setswana kapa oka bolella na Sepedi ge ile gore nyo go bolela Sepedi, Seswati, Sexhosa. We welcome any language that if we don't understand what you're saying, we'll definitely ask you to translate that in English. But hey, why not ask with in any language of your choice? We'll definitely try to assist you to the best of our abilities. There we go. And Pratima, you would like to mention something, and we're going to jump straight to Mbali afterwards.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I wanted to highlight the aims of the Act as was asked by Nonkulelo from Uppington, I think it was, if I pronounced the name correctly. Now, the Act is very specific about what it's trying to do. It says very clearly, it says it's providing a child justice system which caters for children. And then it says they're creating the possibility of diverting children who are in conflict with the law. And also where it's appropriate to see that children are not made part of the formal criminal justice system via the courts. Okay. Then it also wants to expand and entrench the principles of restorative justice, and it also wants the present realities of the country in regard to crime to be recognized. In other words, we're not minimizing the effect that children do actually commit offenses. Yeah. So we deal with crime as crime. Mm-hmm. Then we also want to balance the interests of children and society, which is very important. We want to also place mechanisms, special mechanisms and processes which take into account the past and unduly harsh measures sometimes against children in the past. That's very important for us. We also want to look at the long-term benefits of having a less rigid system. We also want to raise the age of criminal capacity, and we want to look at the individual needs and circumstances of children instead of dealing with them in a globular way.
And there's a whole lot more.
Yes, that's correct.
We're going to come back to that. Neville, you back?
Yes, I'm still holding on.
And now, where's my glass of water? Because you've just gone quickly to get a glass of water, but you don't bring any for us, Neville. That's not the right
I don't
man.
know what was going on because I was driving, but I'm packed now.
Thank you so much, sir. What is your question?
My question is, in terms of the Child Justice Act, young people that are detained in secure care centers, and then where you find, in the case where you find that the young person is detained there, but is putting the lives of other young people at risk.
Neville, let me ask you to switch off your radio. I can hear it in the background.
My radio is definitely off.
Okay, I could hear two Nevilles there.
Sorry,
so let me let me hear the one Neville. Go on, sir.
Okay, my question was in terms of the young people that are detained at the secure care center, and they commit other offenses while they are still in detention, or they put the lives of the other young people at risk. Or maybe let me make a practical example. They commit a Schedule 1 offense while they are in detention, but again, they also put the lives of other young people at risk by forcing them, or let's say bullying them, or forcing them to join gangsters while they are still exposed to other developmental programs that are meant to assist them. What resort the staff have in terms of asking for alternative placement for the young person?
Thank you so much. Is that all, sir?
Yeah, my second question is,
okay,
in terms of the Children's Act, if there is a court order that places a young person either at a children's home or at a school of industry, if that young person absconds, there is what we call absconders procedure that is opened. What happens then in the case of young people that are in secure care centers that abscond? Do we also go the route of absconders procedure, or what is it that we need to do?
That
is all.
Thank you so much, Neville. Drive safe.
Thank you. Bye.
There we go. Neville, we're going to be coming back to your questions. 13 after 7 o'clock. Mahlasela. Good evening to you, Mahlasela. What is your question?
Ndade.
Lugandad.
Kete mugandad.
Punya selesel. Bualin.
Ndade ngabota he.
Ehe.
Ndade.
Ngabota ndad. Putwa hawere.
Ndade putwa ya kan ndade how kilo shibi diketsahalo tsena di etsahala bo mapolasing moo batho ba senang bo lesedi le lekalokalo hape moo batho ba ntseng ba ya ka meetlo. So e ka ba tse ke dikotlo di feng tseo batho ba di fuang ba ntseng ke tseo tse soto ka neng. Charity ke nona le potso le
ke a leboha ntate
ngale
ke yona fela potso o nang le yona
ke yona fela ntate
ke a leboha ntate o mametse radio e feng
ngale
o mametse radio e feng
ntate
ke efe radio e mametseng
ntate
o ile he ntate ke a leboha for potso ya hao o na le motho a nang le potso hape dumela lebitso la hao ke mang? Charity.
Yes.
Charity, dumela ausaka potso ha o reng?
What are the responsibilities of these organizations in the Child Act?
Okay, ba tlo e hlalosa hape ba ne ba bua ka yona hona jwale ke na hona mohlomong ha wa utlwa ba tla e hlalosa hape ke leboha mme wa ka gore lwena o re letsitse mohala 15 after 7 o'clock. Yes, you lost track there all of a sudden. I'm looking at my paper and it's written all over. I don't know where to start. Let's start somewhere. You're already in Bali. Let's start from you, and then I'll work my way through all these questions. And then coming up, we're going to be having a clip. That's one of the child that's living on the streets. He's going to be talking about the impact of social development in their lives. Hang in there. That's all coming up, Mbali.
Could I start with Charity's question?
Let's go for it, yes.
Because for us, children under 10, really it's the Children's Act that is operating. We're treating them as children in need of care and protection. So basically, as the police, what happens, even if the child is involved in some crime, then it is for us to then hand the child over to a social worker who can then do further assessments, determining all these things that Vuyokazi was also talking about, assessing whether the family situation, what is contributing to their dealing with crime, and then processing the child. So in that way, that could be treated as a child who is either neglected in terms of the Children's Act, which could be what is then contributing to them being involved in crime.
Yeah.
So that is really what I can say in that regard.
Can I add something to what Mbali is just saying? I think it's very important. The issue of children, even as we've explained, children who are underage commit crime, but you'll find that sometimes, even where the child is over the age of 10, that child has been neglected to such an extent that child might be also in need of care and protection. And in a situation like that, for instance, you'll find that the probation officer's assessment report will make mention of the circumstances of the child. And when the child is then referred to the prosecutor may find that this is not a child who's committing offences as a result of being willful or knowing that this is a criminal offence, but actually is a child who cannot survive as a result of needing care and protection, and the child will then be referred via the court to the children's court, where this matter will be dealt with further. So the criminal issue will be dealt with further by the children's court. Now, the children's court is different to the child justice courts. The children's courts deal with children who are in need of care and protection, and in terms of the Children's Act, whereas the child justice court deal with children who are in conflict with the law and deal with their criminal issues. So these are two separate courts, and we need to bear that, and two separate acts in effect, and we need to bear that very clearly in mind. Thank you.
18 after 7 o'clock. Let's hear another clip from the same child that we've heard earlier on. But this time around, the impact of social development in their lives. What's their take on it, and how is it affecting their lives? Let's find out quickly what they're saying about that.
Social development. What do you think they should do to assist you guys?
Social development and at least baka plan maybe two severa ba under 18 no one or two plan or like ba sona phela ba swara